So welcome to our, I think this is lecture number 86, I think. Regardless, we're about to start chapter 43 in part 2 of the Moreh Nevuchim, and that is on page 391 in the Pines edition is where we're at in the English version. And we are in the middle of learning about prophecy. And the Rambam made several points. He told us about his cognitive model, right? How prophecy works, and how basically he divides the human consciousness into two parts. There was the active intellect and the imaginative intellect, right? And the imaginative intellect, right? The imaginative is where our images appear, right? When we imagine things, when we see things, and it's also where we receive all of our sensory input from the world around us. And the kinds of things and then the active intellect flows into the imaginative faculty by bringing down the consciousness that comes from the levels above us, right, from the spheres above us, ultimately from the ultimate active intellect, which comes from God, which overflows to the lower spheres, to the lower spheres, to the lower spheres, those lower spheres being called angels, that continually pass that consciousness into our active intellect. It's our job, according to Rambam, to perfect that active intellect. And the way that one perfects that active intellect is by accumulating wisdom, knowledge, logic, and of course, I'm sorry, this term is the Aristotelian. The what did he call this? The spiritual knowledge. Okay, so when one gains all of those things, then a prophet gets to the level where he or she it so perfects their active intellect and has so much control over their imaginative intellect that what their imaginary faculty sees is real, right? Is true, and is not so influenced by all of the desires that we have that surround us in this world, by all of the lowly things that surround us. And if it's perfected to the highest level, then one can see prophecy, right? Because that prophecy is what comes ultimately. That active intellect is getting its knowledge from the active intellect that is above us, which so where we're receiving knowledge from up above, from God himself, so to speak. And the Rama made a very important, he made several observations and things that he taught us in the last couple chapters. The last chapter, he discussed the importance of understanding that what a prophet always sees is always in a vision or a dream, right? Whether it's in a daydream or whether it's in a sleep kind of dream, but it's always in some kind of vision or dream. And I pointed this out last time, and I'm going to point it out this time again. The reason why the Rambam feels this is so important becomes evident as we go through what he's saying, is because he wants us to understand that all of this is taking place within our consciousness, within our minds. When we say that God speaks to someone, it doesn't mean that there's somebody down here talking to us, or that there's an angel sitting by my dining room table giving me a lecture, right? So in other words, because he's divorcing those supernatural type phenomenons that can be imposed onto this world, and he's making it into something that we can, that's within our experience. We all have imaginations. We all know what it means to see an image in our dreams, in our visions. So he's bringing prophecy into the realm of what we can understand and what we can grasp within the physical realities that we're used to, right? Of course, his cognitive model is not exactly the same as the modern cognitive model of how our brain functions, but it very much fits with the Aristotelian understanding of how thought and action work, and how we're influenced from and how we get that thought energy, so to speak, from the spheres above us. So we're about to start chapter 43. So we have already explained in our compilations, right? We've in other words, we mentioned it in Mishnah Torah, that prophets sometimes prophesy in parables. Okay, so in other words, they don't always, and this is part of the same idea, because this is our imaginative faculty that sees these images, we don't always see exactly a message, right? It doesn't say tomorrow this and this is going to happen, right? And it lays it out. That's not how it works. That's not how our imaginative faculty works, right? We see things often, and prophets see things in parables. Sometimes a prophet sees a thing under the aspect of a parable, the meaning of that parable being sometimes interpreted to him in that same very vision of prophecy, right? So in other words, he might see an image of a tree, and then within within that dream, within that vision, he sees also the interpretation of what that tree is supposed to represent, what it's supposed to teach, what does it mean. Just as a man may see a dream and imagine in that dream that he has already awakened and that he has related the dream to somebody else and has interpreted this meaning to him, all this taking place in a dream. You can dream all kinds of things. You can dream in a dream that you saw something, and while you're still dreaming, you're dreaming that you woke up and told somebody about it, and all that is occurring in a dream. Rambam is emphasizing this. We'll see in very soon, because often it says a prophet sees a dream, and then we see an interpretation. Either the prophet says, and the angel explained to me that what the meaning of what I was seeing was X, Y, Z, right? So one might think, right? You might think that, so the angel came and talked, right? And Daniel dreamed, and then an angel came and visited him and sat by his bed and said, this is what you saw, right? Rambam doesn't want you to think that. He wants you to understand that it's all occurring within the dream, okay? This is what they call a dream solved in a dream. That's a term from the Gemara in Brachos. Again, there are dreams whose meaning becomes known after one awakens. Sometimes they may see it, a vision, but not quite fully grasp it until they wake up, and then all of a sudden what they saw makes sense. It has relevance. When they're able to actually control their rational thinking, they can see, oh, that's what he's talking about, right? So again, there are dreams. Okay. So similarly, there are parables of the prophets whose meaning is interpreted in a vision of prophecy, right? Sometimes within the parable, right, in the same way, like I said before, the parables can be interpreted within the vision, as made clear with regard to Zechariah, when he says, if you want to read a book of Tanakh, and of course, I'll always guide you to my own podcast, to Let the Prophet Speak, where I did teach Zechariah. But the Zechariah is a book of lots of these like really out there visions of all kinds of weird stuff, and interpreting them is quite challenging, to say the least. But when he says, after having first set forth the parables, he says these parables, which are extremely difficult to understand, like what the meaning of all these visions are. Then he says, and the angel that spoke with me returned and woke me, and as a man that is wakened out of a sleep, and he said unto me, what do you see? And so on, and then interpreted the parable for him. And as is made clear with regard to Daniel in the dictum, Daniel had a dream. Remember, Rambam emphasized to us, though, that whenever it says that an angel speaks to someone, right, he told us that last chapter and the chapter before, it's always in a vision, right? So Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Thereupon it sets forth all the parables and mentions his being anxious. That Daniel was nervous because he didn't know what they meant until he asked the angel, who in that very vision made note to him their interpretation. And that is what he says, I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. In some of the cases in Daniel, it says that the angel explained it to him, but we don't know what the angel explained to him. But that's a different story. So it calls the whole story a vision after having mentioned that Daniel had a dream. This in view of the fact that has been mentioned, an angel interpreted the dream to him in a dream of prophecy. Again, this all occurred within a dream. This is made known in the dictum that comes afterwards. A vision, a chazon, appeared unto me, even unto Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at first. So again, he says a chazon is to lachazot, is to perceive something, usually in a visual sense. Mar'eh is a vision derived from the word ra'ah, to see, right? And so lachazot and lirot are just two synonyms that basically are different words to meaning to see. Although lachazot is more often used to see as in I see, like I see what you're saying, as opposed to, but it still means see. As a third way, when sometimes it says other than the two stated expressly in the Torah, I do make myself known unto him in a vision, I do speak with him in a dream. I'm sorry, and there is no third way other than those two. The only way you hear a prophecy is in a vision and a dream. when the Rambam says things over and over and over again, it's almost always because he's trying to uh, force us to get rid of a notion that he doesn't like that's very prevalent, right? So, and the notion here seems obvious. The obvious notion is the idea that angels are beings that walk around in this world and talk to us. Maybe not me and you, but the holy man, the angel will come, sit down by his dining room table, have a cup of tea, and give him a whole talk, right? Or when it says somewhere that someone encounters God, right? That you think that that God talked to him. The only one that can be described in the Rambam's theology, and this is very important, that talked to God is Moshe Rabbeinu, which is a different thing, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about all other prophecies, not the prophecy of Moshe, right? So the Rambam is saying this over and over and over again because he wants us to get that notion out of our mind, right? The notion of an angel is simply that influence, that cognitive influence that flows from the heavens into our active intellect and makes it and is really the energy behind our thought, is where the source of where cognitive thought comes from, and how we go about our lives and make our decisions and do our thinking. So, however, there are degrees in regard to this that shall be explained. I'll get to the degrees of prophecy. We might get to start them tonight, but might not. But we'll get there. Among the parables of the prophet, now think about it for a minute, and we'll get there too, but I just want to emphasize how important this is. Think about some of the dreams of the prophets that are way out there, like the most famous being the prophecy of Ezekiel, of the Merkava, right, where Ezekiel sees the heavens and everything. So what the Rambam is trying to emphasize is it's all a vision. Ezekiel didn't go to heaven and see these things. These were things that were a vision, right? It takes it way down to earth, right? It makes it all of a sudden something we can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine having a dream with all of these really powerful, earth-shattering things and strange angels and fiery things and God on a chariot. And once it's a dream, I can imagine seeing God in all kinds of ways, right? But if you think that the prophet is actually seeing God, whoa, that brings up a lot of theological thorny questions, right? But once the Rambam emphasizes over and over again, this is a dream, this is a dream, this is a dream, right? Now you understand why I'm saying this, because like the Rambam, trying to say why he feels this is so important to say this, right? So again, among the parables of the prophets, there are many whose meaning is not interpreted in a vision of prophecy, but whose purpose is known, and he referenced this a couple lines ago, by the prophet after he awakens. Thus, the parable of the staves, and we're going to get to that parable soon. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in Zechariah. No, that just as the prophets see things whose purpose it is to constitute a parable, right? As for instance, Zechariah's lamps, the menorah, we actually read that on Shabbos Chanukah as a haftorah and shul. We read the menorah, the lamps of Zechariah, and the horses in the mountains. Zechariah has a lot of visions of horses. We don't have time here to get into all this stuff, but it's all is on my podcast. If you want to listen to Zechariah, it's incredibly fascinating book and one of the most difficult books in Tanakh. And it was really, really cool to learn and teach that sefer. But an Ezekiel's scroll and the wall made by a plumb line seen by Amos, and the beast seen by Daniel, and the seething pot. I'll just stop here on the seething pot for a minute because it's a little more famous in the beginning of Yirmiyahu, and we read this on Shabbos I think it's Shabbos Chazon, right? No, that's Chazon Yeshayahu. I'm sorry. The first of the 3 weeks we read Yirmiyahu. The first of the 3 weeks of mourning we read Yirmiyahu, and he sees a makel shaked, a stick with almonds, right? That has now the word shaked, lishkod, also means to be moving quickly, to move fast, right, or to be diligent about something, right? So the Rambam, and there was a seething pot, a cauldron, which was tilting towards the north, which was referring to the cauldron, the Babylonians that were going to come and attack, right? So these were things that he saw, right, that were seen by Yirmiyahu and other similar parables, whose purpose it is to imitate certain notions. They also see things whose purpose it is to point out what is called to the attention by the term designating the thing seen. So sometimes what a seething pot can give you an image of a bubbling, boiling army that's coming upon us. You can imagine that. So that's that kind of parable. Other parables, Rambam says, it's from the meaning of the word, right? They might see something that represents something else because of the word that's being used to describe it. So in that case, the action of the imaginative faculty consists in occasioning the appearance of a thing designated by an equivocal term, right? Through one of the meanings, another can be indicated. So this too is one of the kinds of making parable. For instance, the makel shaked, I'm paraphrasing a little bit to move through this quicker, is an indication of the equivocality of the term shaked, which he saw a stick with almonds, right? But the Torah says, ki shoked ani, right? Because I am shoked ani, I'm watching over diligently, watching over it. I'm going to make sure this happens, God says, right? Thus, in this case, the intention of the parable, it wasn't, there's nothing happened of significance into the people he was prophesying to with almond sticks or almond branches, right? What happened to the people, unfortunately, was the destruction of the temple, which God was watching over and making sure was going to happen, right? Similarly, when Amos saw a kluv kayetz, a basket of fruit, right, he would infer from it the end of the period and so on. So because kayetz meant haketz, the end, and the basket of fruit represented the end of time, the time people's time is up. So again, it's a play on words, but that's how our brain works. And we can imagine in a dream our brain working that way. Stranger than this, than this, and I'm in the last paragraph on 392 now, is the intimation aroused through the use of a certain term whose letters are identical. So sometimes you may have where it's not the word, but it's the letters. And I'm go through this a little quickly, where Zechariah, right, in a vision of prophecy, takes two staves. Those are, I'm assuming those are staffs, right, in order to shepherd cattle. One of them was called Noam, and the other one Chovlim, right? Noam is sweet, is grace, is nice. Chovlim is people that destroy, that ravage. So the intention of the parable was to show that in the beginning, right, the people were being shepherded by God's grace, right? There was a beautiful relationship between God and the people took rejoiced in pleasure and obedience to God, and God was pleased and loved it, and so on, right? And Moshe was the one who governed, and so on. This was Noam. That's the one stick. Afterwards, it came to pass that obedience to God became repugnant to it. The people didn't interested in God anymore. They hated God. And of course, it became repugnant to God. So, and then God set up Chovlim, which Chovlim are referring to the evil kings. Yeravam, who's the archetype of the evil kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, and Menashe, the archetype of the evil kings of the southern kingdom of Yehuda. This is to be understood according to the etymological derivation of the word. Chovlim comes from the word mechablim kramim, right? So again, so the prophet was inferring from the word chovlim their repugnance for the law, right? And the repugnance of God for them. However, this meaning can be derived from chovlim through changing the order of the hey, the beis, and the lamed, right? So how does that work? Because it says within the context, and my soul became impatient, and their soul also loathed me. They hated me. Bochalah bi, right? So bochalah, which means to hate. So chovlim is a flip of the word hate. So they're using those same letters. That's why he called the sticks, which were the leadership, right? Who were the leadership at a time of hatred between the people and God, right? That same stick is the stick of hatred, of bachalah, right? So again, it's using that word. So it's in the letters of the word. You flip them around a little bit, and you get all this image conveying a message. Through this method, very strange things appear, which are likewise secrets, as in its dictum with regard to the chariot, which is of course referring to what we talked about before, the first chapter of Ezekiel, and the Rambam will go into much more detail of how to interpret that later. Not today, but later in the book 3. If you carefully examine each passage in your mind, it will come clear to you after your attention has been aroused from the gist of what has been set forth here. Okay, so bottom line is that all of these things that the prophets are seeing, they're not actually seeing them. Those things didn't appear before them, but rather what they saw was a vision. Okay. Now, if you go through Tanakh, you'll see if you look at the classic Mefarshim, you'll see that many commentaries will take a Maimonidean type approach and understand that the visions of the prophets are visions, but many will take a more, the word traditional is not right, because Maimonidean is pretty traditional and goes back quite a way, but a less rational a look, and they'll look at when a prophet says he saw something, they'll interpret it as if they actually did see it and that event actually did occur, which would then make that event into a miracle. But one of the ways that Rambam demiracleizes all of these events and all of these prophecies is by making them into a vision. Okay, so again, chapter 44 on the top of page 394 starts with the same thing. Rambam says, I don't know, for time number, I don't know, probably 8 or 9, maybe just in the last few pages. Prophecy occurs only in a vision or in a dream, as we have already explained several times. Accordingly, we shall not perpetually repeat this. And this is not the first time where Rambam says, I'm not going to repeat something that he just repeated 1,000 times. But we shall say now something new, right? That when a prophet prophesies, he sometimes sees a parable, as we have explained several times. Okay, again, sometimes he sees God. Okay, so here I kind of gave this away a little bit because I told you about why this is so important. It's so important because we cannot make that terrible mistake of thinking that when a prophet, because remember, if you think that when Ezekiel saw a valley of dry bones, that there actually was a valley of dry bones that appeared to him and he saw them, right? Rather than thinking that he saw it in a vision, and you keep going with that same logic, then you're also going to think that when Ezekiel describes his vision of God, that's actually what God looks like, or at least that's what God appeared like when Ezekiel saw him, right? So this can lead to huge theological errors in the view of Rambam, right? So given that's the case, so sometimes he sees God may be exalted in a vision of prophecy speaking to him. So as Yeshayahu says, as Isaiah says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? This was in I think it's chapter 6 in Yeshayahu. We describes his vision where he was given the job of being a prophet. Sometimes he hears an angel speaking to him and he sees him. So he sees an angel. Don't make a mistake and think that an angel is actually a being that a person sees. It's not how it works, right? But you might make that mistake. This occurs frequently. And he brings a bunch of examples. And the angel of God said unto me, and he said unto me, and so on. I heard the Holy One speaking. It occurs numerous times. Sometimes the prophet sees a human speaking to him. Like it says in Ezekiel, behold, there was a man whose appearance, so on and so forth. I'm kind of running through this a little. So he says this after he had said before, and the hand of the Lord was upon me, that as if, and one might think that Ezekiel experienced God's hand touching him. You can easily interpret the verses that way, because that's, if you read them literally, that's how you'll translate them. Sometimes the prophet doesn't see a form, but he hears in a vision speech. And Daniel said, I heard the voice of a man. Or Eliphaz says, Eliphaz, it's kind of questionable if he was a prophet. He was one of the friends of Eov, and Eov, it doesn't matter for this point now. There was silence, and I heard a voice. And Ezekiel says, and I heard him that spoke, so on and so forth. First, he says, in which he apprehended, right? This is again Ezekiel in the beginning talking about his vision of heaven. And so for that which he apprehended in the vision of prophecy was not he who spoke to him. It was a vision in his mind of God speaking to him, and he envisioned God in a certain way in that vision. So first he sets forth in detail the wondrous and strange story of that which he explicitly affirms to have apprehended. Okay. And then he explains it. Now, in the last paragraph on chapter 44, he continues, after we have set forth as a preface this classification, which is attested by the text, I say that sometimes the prophet imagines the speech heard by him in the vision of prophecy to be extremely loud. The Rambam is still banging the same notion in, but he's banging it from different directions. Now he's saying a person can read and say, well, if why does it say, it said it by Shmuel, it also says it by Eliyahu, but he's bringing Shmuel here. I'm jumping ahead of myself. He's going to bring Shmuel in a minute, right? But we find by Eliyahu also where God appears, there's a storm, and then there's a earthquake, and then there's a soft voice, right? So, but but if he's seeing it in his mind, what do you mean? There's different like decibels, and there's different. But and what I'm saying is yes. When you see a vision, sometimes you imagine a loud voice, sometimes you imagine a soft voice, sometimes you imagine something really noisy, and something really sweet, and something really shaky, because it's all in a vision. So just as a man dreams that he hears loud thunder, sees an earthquake or hurricane, such dreams are frequent, and so on. Sometimes he apprehends the speech he hears in a vision as familiar and well-known speech, so that nothing in him strikes it as strange, right? This may become clear to you from the story of Shmuel. So remember Shmuel, when he was being taught by Eli, the Kohen Gadol, right? Shmuel heard a voice from God when he was younger and didn't know what it was. And he ran, "Did you call me? Did you call me?" And then he goes back to bed and comes back, "Did you call me? Did you call me?" And then finally he comes, "No, that's God speaking to you," right? So, so scripture then explains. So in other words, all Shmuel heard, he must have heard just a voice, right? He didn't know what the voice was. He didn't know how to interpret it. He didn't understand what it meant, right? So it was just a dream, but it woke him up. It shook him enough to wake him up. So scripture explains the cause, saying that he was obliged to act so and to think that it was Eli who called him, because he did not know then that the speech of God to the prophets takes place in this form. He didn't know this is how it worked. He didn't know how prophecy worked. Accordingly, in order to account for the cause, it says Shmuel did not yet know the Lord. He did not yet know. It means that he did not yet know, and that it had not been revealed to him that the word of God comes in this way. Maybe Shmuel thought at the time that the word of God comes when you see an angel standing, a guy comes glowing and shining bright, and he starts speaking to you in a very spiritual way, and they say, "Oh, that's an angel. That's how God speaks." No, that's not how God speaks. He speaks in a dream, and so on. So, before that time, Shmuel had not become a prophet. Neither did he know that such was the form of prophecy. Know this, okay? So this is So he spent several chapters knocking these notions into our head. We now understand that all visions, every single time there's an encounter within Tanakh, and this is a rule that we can carry with us. Every single time there's an encounter within Tanakh between a prophet who describes an encounter with something divine or a divine being like an angel, whether it's with God himself or whether it's or an angel or anything like that, it is always referring to a vision. There aren't angels walking around speaking to holy people. It just doesn't work that way. And that's the main point that we have to get out of it. The way it works is these people have perfected their minds to the point where they see the truth, they see reality, and they can also see and perceive events in the future because they understand where events lead, what's happening, where things go, and they see things in visions, in dreams, in parables, and so on. Okay, so now Rambam is going to get to something more technical. This next chapter, there's no way we'll finish it today, but we can start it. Chapter 45, he's going to describe the levels of prophecy, the degrees of prophecy. We're getting very, very close to the end of Book 2, and the subject of prophecy is going to take us all the way to the end of Book 2. But we do have time. Any comments on all this before we hit chapter 45?
I do have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could. This was on chapter 43.
Okay.
At the bottom of the page, there's this statement that says, "There is no difference between one saying in a mar'eh, a vision, in a machazeh,
Right.
or in a chazon."
Right.
But do all three of those refer to this state when
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
when the prophet is basically not awake?
Yeah. So whether he's technically asleep in the scientific sense, is not clear, but he's definitely in some sort of a trance. You know, he might be. I mean, I don't know exactly where the line between awake and asleep is. I guess there are scientists, that are experts in these things, but it's some sort of a trance, some sort of a vision that he's perceiving it within his consciousness.
Okay. Okay. All three of those words.
Yeah. So if it says chalom, which is not one of those three, then that means he's sleeping, right? A
Oh,
chalom is a dream,
right.
right? But a machazeh or a mareh or a chazon is a vision, which can be when you're asleep, but it can also be when you're in some kind of a trance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. Any other comments with all this so far? All right. Now soon he's okay. So chapter 45 is going to be interesting, and he's going to bring, to some degree, he's going to bring prophecy home to all of us. Um, but let's see what he says. So after the preceding explanation of the true reality of prophecy, according to the requirements of speculation combined with the explanation supplied by our law, right, by the Torah. So in other words, after I just explained to you what the mechanics of prophecy is, and I explained to you what prophecy is, how it happens, and what it isn't, right? And I told it to you based on speculation, meaning based on science. That's when Rambam says speculation, he means logic, thinking, thought, science, combined with the Torah, right? In other words, by using both sources, the scripture to support my assertion, and common sense, or not really common sense, but scientific inquiry. So now it's time to mention the degrees of prophecy according to these two sources. Again, using the sources of science and the sources of Torah. We've seen this a bazillion times in the Rambam, using both sources in order to come to knowledge. Now, not everybody. So I'm going to tell you what the degrees are. Like, what are the levels? Obviously, in most things in life, there's levels. If you say anything about anyone, a guy is strong. Okay, so this guy is strong, but that guy, I mean, and then the other was an Olympic weightlifting champion, right? So there's levels, right? So prophecy, there's also levels, right? So but before I even tell you what the degrees are, I want to make a point, right? Now, not everybody who is found in one of the degrees, which I call prophecy, is a prophet, right? So right there, Rambam is giving you a hint that we all may have access to some of these levels of prophecy sometimes. And even the guy who's on the top, who's a big prophet, sometimes might be down on the lower level, right? So you have to understand, all right, so these are levels of prophecy, but some of us have access to some of these things, but it doesn't really make us a prophet, right? For the first and second degree, which he's going to explain in most length, right, are stepping stones towards prophecy, are things that bring a person in that direction. So they are levels only in the sense that they're getting you there. It's like, if you imagine a stairway to the top of a mountain and there's, 100 stairs, right? So the first stair is also a stair, but you're not going to really say that guy got very high. It's not really a mountain climber if he just went up one stair, right? If he's up to stair number 60, 70, ooh, wow, he's up there, right? But it is still a step in that direction. And even though he may, right, and someone who has attained one of them is not to be considered as a prophet belonging to the class of prophets discussed in the preceding chapter. He's not a Yirmiyahu, a Jeremiah, or an Ezekiel, but he's a guy who managed to get a little somewhere, to purify his mind to the point where he's moving in the right direction. Even though he may sometimes be called a prophet, occasionally, such as a person who might be on level 1 may even be called a prophet, but it's a term applied in a general sort of way because he is manifesting certain characteristics which are related to prophecy. So in that sense, we call him a prophet, even though because he's very close to the prophets, because he's close, meaning he's moving along the same path as they are. You should not be misled with regard to those degrees by the fact that sometimes you find in the prophet's books that a prophetic revelation came to a prophet in the form characteristic of a certain degree. And with all it is made clear with regard to the very same prophet that a prophetic revelation also came to him under a form characteristic of another degree. Because Rambam is going to tell us the different degrees of prophecy and how they are described. So you might find a certain prophet once saying something which seems to fit in level 11, and then the next chapter you'll find that same prophet being described having a level 13, right? So don't be disturbed by that, right? Because it's not like it's not something that like you get a black belt in karate, now you're a black belt. Before you were, I don't know, whatever level is before black. If someone knows, tell me. But before you were, let's say, a blue belt, right? And once you're a blue belt, you're always a blue belt. That's just the way it is, right? And once you're a black belt, no, that's not how it works. a person sometimes could be functioning at this level and sometimes at that level, which in our own lives we know is much more realistic, right? Sometimes it just works. We got it. We're on target. We're at work and we understand it all and we just see the path through it and we get through. And sometimes we're just not on that day and it just doesn't seem to not on that level. Maybe we didn't get a good night's sleep. Maybe we're having a fight at home or who knows, whatever it is, right? So with regard to the degrees I shall mention, it sometimes happens that I just turned the page, some of the prophetic revelation of one particular prophet comes according to a form of a certain degree, whereas another comes at another time, corresponds to a degree inferior. So this happens. For just as a prophet may not prophesy continuously the whole of his life, right? When a prophet gets to a certain level, he's not being a prophet all day, right? But prophecies at a certain moment and is abandoned by prophecies at many other moments. So may he also prophesy at a certain moment and form characteristics of a high degree, at another moment in an inferior degree. All right. Sometimes perhaps he achieves this high degree only once in his life. You may have a prophet who has only one really high level prophecy in his entire life and then is deprived of it. Or perhaps he remains fixed in the inferior degree until the cessation of his prophecy. So bottom line is that, some prophets work and work and work, get to a certain level, and then they falter, or they're just not quite what they were at that moment of greatness. But there is no doubt that the prophesying of all the prophets comes to an end before their death, either shortly or a long time before. There comes a time as they're nearing death that it's over, that their career as a prophet is over. And this is made clear with regard to Yirmiyahu at the termination of the word of the Lord by the mouth of Yirmiyahu. And likely this could be physical weakness that leads to that, or it could be the Rambam has told us before some hints as to why a prophet wouldn't prophesy, right? And one of those is sadness or melancholy, right? The Rambam made it clear that no one can prophesy when they're in a sad state, even if the sadness is warranted, right? It's not like sometimes sadness could be because we're depressed and it could be a psychological issue. It's a problem. It's an issue. In other words, you're not having a natural reaction to something real, but so it it could be that. But sometimes sadness could be real. I mean, God, so we have a loss in our family. It's appropriate. It's a normal, appropriate reaction. But still, at that point, the prophet can't prophesy because it just doesn't work. So from this, one must draw an inference to all of the prophets. After having made and propounded this introduction, I shall begin to set forth the degrees that have been alluded to and shall accordingly make the following statement. All right, so he's about to do it, but this is gonna have to be where we'll stop for today, because the first degree and the second, as you see, if you just flip forward, you'll see some of them he spends, a long time describing, and some of them, especially in the beginning, like the first and second, and you'll see also as we read through the first and second that there are things that are more relatable to us, which is part of the reason why he discusses them at more length. But we're about to embark on this description. So I will stop here. We'll take questions. I think the part 2 has 48 chapters, so I think in another probably maybe 3 more lectures we'll probably finish the second book. We'll have to think of some way to celebrate when we get there. But I won't be able to teach next. I think it's 3 weeks. Let me look. Hold on. Tomorrow I'm starting a mission to army mission to Germany. Yeah, you know what? So it's 2 weeks I'm gonna miss. The 29th I'll be back, but the 15th and the 22nd I won't be able to teach. But hopefully the 29th we'll be back learning again, and maybe even finish the whole book by Shavuos.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anybody have any observations, comments, questions?
I do.
Okay.
You may have covered this before, or you may be intending to cover this in the future, but with all these levels of prophecy, it got me to thinking that, and maybe that traditional Judaism maintains that the age of prophecy is over, that uh, that and I don't
Yeah.
know.
So So the Rambam really explained to us why the age. Remember, I can't remember exactly the chapter. We could look it up. He gave us a few hints, and one of them is he told us that the reason why the age of prophecy is over is because after the exile, there's just a sadness envelops us all, so that we can't be prophets anymore. Right? There's just this baseline sadness that we lost our country, we lost our temple, we lost our people, we're exiled, we're being bounced all over the world. So one would conclude from that, if that's the reason why prophecy is gone, then one would conclude from that should should our suffering end, which unfortunately we know all too well, despite that we do have some level of sovereignty of our own in our homeland, but far from the end of suffering, and far from the days of peace where we dedicate ourselves to peace, justice, study, learning, knowledge. It has not arrived yet, but when it does, we'll be prophets again, or we'll have prophets again.
When Mashiach comes, then
Right.
does he endorse the idea that the prophets will come back? Because when the Mashiach comes,
Yeah, he's going to talk a little bit about Mashiach in this very chapter, a little bit. But he's also, the Mashiach is a prophet, right? There's a famous debate as to whether or not Mashiach is a prophet at the level of Moshe or not. But according to Rambam, not at all. And no one ever will be. But there are other Rishonim that take different positions. But that's a different subject. But according to Rambam, it doesn't seem like there's any reason to imagine that Mashiach will be the only prophet during those days. The path to prophecy will be open to all of us.
Yay.
Not just and not just Jews. It'll be open to everyone, every human being, but it's the way Rambam and what the concept of Mashiach is an extremely interesting subject, and he'll touch on it a little bit as we go through Mor Nevuchim, although until this point we had precious little of anything about Mashiach. It'll be a little bit in this chapter and a little bit here and there in the rest of the book. In Mishnah Torah, he talks about it at much more length. So what he actually believed about the time of Mashiach is a subject of huge discussion. But one of the main things that's important is this is clear for sure, and that is just like in almost every other aspect of what Rambam teaches, he takes it from being some really wild, like spiritual notions of miracles and angels and flying white donkeys and mountain splitting and all that stuff, and he makes it into something extremely real, scientifically normal, and like the Rambam emphasizes the normalness of the time of Mashiach. Normalness in the sense that science still works, the world still functions the way the world still functions, and the laws of nature don't change. And he emphasizes that aspect of it a lot. So he brings it down to earth. So I'm going off a little bit, but it's a subject that I'm particularly interested in. It's fascinating because this vision of Mashiach, right? If you imagine two different extreme visions of Mashiach, and you can probably think of people that that would imagine Mashiach in one or the other way, right? They'll fit into two camps. Some imagine Mashiach as this incredible spiritual event, right? They imagine Mashiach, they may not actually think that Mashiach is going to come riding on a white donkey and flying down from the clouds, and all of a sudden miracles are going to happen in the world. There's going to be splittings of the seas, but you certainly read about people that think about, all the bodies rolling to Israel and the synagogues getting up and flying to Israel, and all these notions of magical stuff happening, right? And then now or that's one extreme. The other extreme is those that take the Rambam's approach that Mashiach is it's an event that happens. It's the laws of nature, laws of science are the same. It is the ultimate achievement of human society, right? When we fulfill our job of bringing knowledge of God to the world and bringing justice and peace, and the world's at peace and people are living peacefully in their land and they're able to devote themselves to pursuing knowledge and so on. Now, if you think about it for a moment, the ramifications of those two different views, right? If you take the spiritual side all the way that way, right? Could you imagine a Zionist movement, right? Uh, Developing out of the Jewish people if we took the spiritual side, let's take that view all to its extreme, right? Could you imagine the whole notion of us going to Israel, right, and us planting fields and plowing fields and building buildings and building businesses and making governments and making armies and making economies and making colleges and universities and making our own, it just doesn't work. That's not how you imagine a redemption happening, right? And a lot of scholars have shown how, if not for the Rambam's vision, the Zionist movement wouldn't have made sense to the Jewish people. It wouldn't have worked, right? It's because the only way you can imagine Mashiach as being the product of a human endeavor is if you take the Rambam's approach, right? Because we're not waiting for some, miracles and flying donkeys and whatever it is that you're imagining in your mind, right? So it's a very human thing, right? We go to the land of Israel. We build a country that's just and righteous. Whether or not we built a country that's just or righteous, that's a different question altogether. But at least the notion of doing such a thing makes sense, right? If not for the Rambam's vision of Mashiach, the return to our homeland could never have been imagined by the Jewish people. It's not something that would even have made sense. We would have been waiting for, like the Christians are, for the second coming, and they have all kinds of their book of, I don't know, Revelation, about all kinds of apocalypses that are going to and those things certainly are within Judaism too, right? But those are the views that lean in the other direction. If we would have if that was what we went to thinking, and there are plenty of Jews that do think that, right? We could never have imagined doing this, right? So, and Rambam is crucial, is absolutely crucial for the notion that we can just go and build our country, right? And so it's a very it had, so his influence in that sense on the future development of the Jewish people, I mean, is profound. I mean, it's impossible to overestimate how important the Rambam is to everything that's happening to this day in front of our eyes. It's a point that I saw an article by a guy who writes a lot of scholarly articles. His name is Aviezer Ravitsky, who wrote about this. This is what I'm just telling you now. But anyway, I thought that was interesting.
One quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
What you described, what Maimonides describes as a vision, or it's like maybe a scientist sitting in an armchair having an inspiration and coming up with an original idea of something, but but we're not talking about that kind of thing when it comes to a prophetic vision.
It may actually be. Let's see when we study the levels if that fits into one of those levels. But the Rambam already did tell us, again, I can't remember, it was about maybe 10 or 15 chapters ago, that intuition, knowing and understanding a situation and where it's going to lead, is a level of prophecy, right? So in other words, if you're an intelligent person and you realize and you understand because you studied the science, the example that I always think of is when you have a mob of people gathered together, right? And sometimes that group of people, you don't get the sense that there's that it's going to lead to violence, for example, right? And imagine, different, protests in the street, right? Some protests, people are waving flags and singing songs and holding their, their shoulders and rocking back and forth and kumbaya, and everybody, and then they're crying and lighting candles and putting flower. You don't have the feeling. So you look at a big crowd of people, but you just know that this is not going to result in violence, right? You see another mob, and then all of a sudden you see they're chanting really loud and strong and angry, and there's anger in the air, and there's frustration in the air, and people have bats in their hand and clubs and 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 poles and maybe God forbid guns, and and instead of chanting, you get the sense, you get the feeling, oh no, this is going in a bad place, right? This is going to lead to violence. This is going to lead to destruction, possibly death even. So it's like, so that's the intuition that a person can have. You look at a situation and you just intuit what's going to happen. So if a guy looks at that crowd on street A and says, oh, that's going to be violent, you better get the police down there fast, right? And you look at the other one and say, oh, don't worry about those guys. Let them sing. They're fine. Let them do their thing, right? So that intuition, Rambam already told us, is a level of prophecy, right? Because it's wisdom that we've achieved, we've learned over time how to read those signs. And most of us in whatever field we're in our lives, we have that sense. I mean, I know for myself as a doctor, like I can see two women, pregnant women, pretty much more or less going down the same path, but I just know that this one is going in a bad place and this one is going to be fine. And you can't, you just know, because not, I mean, I would say not because I'm a prophet, but because experience, knowledge, learning, study. But the Rambam says that is a level of prophecy, right? Right?
Okay.
Because how do you become a prophet? By studying, by learning, by practicing, and by training your mind, right? So that when your imaginative faculty sees images, right? The images that we see, which is in my case this pregnant woman or that pregnant woman, right? We can see what we're supposed to see, right? And we can control that imaginative faculty. So I don't see what I want to see, but I see what's actually there, right? And these are the things that make that is a level of prophecy.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
all right.
I look forward to hearing the
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
This is really fun.
Enjoy your trip to Germany.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
All right. Be well. All right.
Excellent.
Kodesh Tov.
Yeah, you too.